Kirk Cousins ranked 16th?
All right, y'all, we are back. I am here once again talking Vikings with two of the smartest people on all of the internet. And we're here to talk about, well, I guess two of the most important players on the team. Maybe coin flip for which one people will put first, even though that's kind of ridiculous. We know which one it should be. And the work coming out from your outlet, Eric, Pro Football Focus. You know, because all through last year, Pro Football Focus was at the core, the center of many of Nick's arguments in favor of Kirk Cousins being the man, being the guy, being the person around whom we should build. And then Kevin, Timo, they came out with this new set of rankings that I'm not going to lie, I'm not smart enough to understand how all this all comes together. And Kirk found his way 16th?
Smack dab in the middle, man.
Right in the middle, which is where many of us have kind of said that Kirk. But anyway, It's neither here nor there. Let's not talk about our priors. Eric, help me understand how Kirk Cousins went from being, you know, a top 6 player by Pro Football Focus grades to falling dab smack in the middle of the pack in this new rankings.
Well, I think a lot of it is, you know, a little bit of stuff is blended in from an efficiency standpoint. So Cousins is graded just fine for us most of the time, but the offense last season was pretty good efficiency-wise. 18, not very good. 17 for him in Washington, not the best. There's also a little bit of a prior folded in, which I'm not exactly sure how much it's weighted. Probably not a whole ton anymore, but about, you know, his draft position, which is obviously not very high. I know that that's what's keeping Mayfield afloat, keeping a guy like Rosen, you know, historically a little lower because he was only 10th overall. So there's just some stuff there, but I would say it's kind of folding in the grades in addition to the efficiency. And that's kind of, I think, where, you know, maybe the disconnect is, because he does grade well for us, but there, you know, you build in some of those efficiency metrics, and sometimes some of the yards are a little hollow for him.
Oh, that's fair. So, Nick, what was your first thought when you saw this piece and you saw where Kirk fell? Because I'm not going to lie, even me, who will be, you know, the first to crack a joke at Kirk's expense on occasion, was very surprised when I had to scroll down as far as I did to find him in this ranking, especially given what we'd seen, you know, in the most recent year that we had of him. And I guess, what are your thoughts? Because I know when we talked about this before, you mentioned that, you know, yes, you potentially could see some regression, or maybe Kirk actually improved on some things. And you have pointed to some traits where you saw improvement from Kirk. So where do you expect things to kind of shake out when you look ahead to 2020?
Yeah, I thought these rankings were good, and I thought they were interesting. And, you know, you read the methodology before you actually get to the rankings. So I think based on the methodology, it makes perfect sense. You know, if you're, you know, you want to weight the 2019 season higher than, you weight that greater than the previous seasons, but those last seasons still count. And 2018, Cousins, his grade was like okay, but like, you know, that was like the peak check down Kirk. Like, yeah, he's not like turning the ball over because he's not generating any positive plays in the first place. So that year, I think the Vikings were like 24th, I want to say, in EPA per play or EPA per pass attempt.
Yeah, and same yards per attempt, all that kind of stuff, where they were kind of bottom third.
It was a bad offense, and you can blame that on JDF mostly, but like part of that is on Cousins. And I think even though his grade will suggest he wasn't that bad, the fact that you're not generating positive plays is like, that's the problem with Kirk Cousins. And last year we saw the Kubiak Stefanski system, you know, with the boots, be able to like reprogram Kirk's mechanics into thinking like, let's chuck this downfield, and it worked out to great effect. And I think he's really good at it when he does it. But you kind of need to scheme the positive plays out of Cousins, because he's just a little reticent to throw the ball into tight coverage or throw the ball downfield. So I don't think it's a bad ranking. I think if you look at guys like Goff or Garoppolo, I'd take Cousins over those two, even though they ranked higher. But I think it's fair to say, you know, let's see if Kirk can repeat what he did last year, because last year he looked like, you know, maybe not like a top 5 quarterback, but maybe something close to that based only on last season's results. And you saw the accuracy. You saw a lot of the traits that you want to see from a franchise quarterback. But I think it's fair to say, was that Stefanski? Was that the scheme? Was that Stefon Diggs? How much was he getting help there? So I think it's fair to say the other seasons still count. and let's see if Cousins can repeat it.
Yeah, you brought up Goff, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, 18 months ago or 20 months ago, whatever, Jared Goff was on Thursday Night Football shredding up a really good Vikings defense, and doing a lot of that himself, like throwing the football, being very good. He was obviously the quarterback of the Rams, and they scored the 54 points against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. And then he's fallen off, right? Because the scheme, I think, has gotten a little stale in LA. But like, does order matter, right? Like, if you go from being brilliant to being a little weaker, whereas Kirk went weaker to brilliant, right? Like, sometimes those things average out, which I've shown, I think, with some of the scheme work that I've done. There's a lot of just like simple, like, regret ping-ponging, sort of back and forth between the mean. So I kind of like how Kirk is sort of balanced in there with some of those guys who can go either way depending upon the circumstances.
Yeah.
So Eric, just one of the things that Nick brought up, and something that's been talked about a lot with Kirk Cousins, especially coming out of this last season, was the scheme and how it did help him, and how much better he was on like play action and different things like that. And I can't help but think about the article that I'm pretty sure you wrote when we talked about paying quarterbacks and like how that affects your team. And you were more focused on like rookie deals more so than like really digging super deep into veterans. But when we think about Kirk and the scheme and how he's helped, I guess when you wrote that piece, how did that, and I researched that piece, like what were your thoughts in terms of Kirk Cousins when, you took all of that information into account?
Yeah, I'm loading the app that I made. So the thesis of that entire thing was more this idea of it's a little bit too obtuse to look just at basically quarterback. I'm trying to find allocation, maybe was the but sort of the idea here is that like it's a little bit obtuse just to look at how much WAR a quarterback is generating per dollar by himself, because there's a whole lot that goes into there are a whole lot of things that like a quarterback can do that are not under the salary cap. So one of them is meshing with a good coach, right? So for example, Stefanski was not under the salary cap last year. You can pay him as much or as little as you want to. How a guy, how you get some sort of convex relationship between coach, quarterback, and receivers. You can often, like, you see it with Russell Wilson all the time. Wilson's paid more than any quarterback in the NFL. But last season, if you looked at WAR per dollar spent on O-line, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, Seattle was still fourth in the NFL. And Baltimore, Kansas City, and Dallas were ahead of them, which makes sense because they're not paying their quarterback that much. So the question is like, when you look at Kirk, like, they're paying Kirk a decent amount of money. The hope that they have now, which is gonna, can they realize this year? Ezra Cleveland's one of their tackles. He might end up starting. They might have to get rid of Reef if it becomes clear that the salary cap's going to contract next season. Brian O'Neill's their right tackle. He's still on a rookie deal. Bradbury, Olabisi Johnson, Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith. All those guys are young and cheap. Kirk's the one making all the money. So if Kirk can take that offense and get, 2.5 wins above replacement from him, maybe 3, and another one or two from the wide receiver position, then he's worth his deal. If he can't, if he's been kind of what Aaron Rodgers has been, which is good, but not elevating the play of those around him, then they're going to struggle. And that's where the question marks of, like, is he being paid too much come into play. And I thought that was like an interesting way to think about it, was more to collect them up, because we know that the quarterback has a huge effect on all the other positions around him.
It's a really smart way to look at it. And I guess is there a way that you can see that ahead of time? Like how, like if you were going to use this information to try to like project who you should and shouldn't pay, like is there a way for us to look at what we know now and project ahead to decide, who we should pay or even how much we should pay that person?
Well, I think this is really trying to take an attempt at doing this, the work by Timo and Kevin, where you look at EPA, you look at grade, you try to see which one can predict the thing into the future more easily. But it's so hard to untangle, quarterback play from the rest of those around. I'm pretty confident that Patrick Mahomes is going to be good no matter who he throws the ball to. I'm pretty confident, and we've already seen it with Russell Wilson. I'm pretty confident that whomever Russell Wilson throws the football to, he's going to be fine. I'm actually fairly confident at this point that whoever, like Jared Goff, needs a good infrastructure to be good. I'm pretty confident that Jimmy Garoppolo needs a good infrastructure to be good. So I'm 75-25 on the fact Kirk probably does, So then Bridgewater, same thing, right? And that's where like sort of the sort of sliding scale comes. Like I like paying Kirk what the Vikings are paying Kirk right now. After they've already front loaded. I really like what the Panthers are paying Teddy, for example, because that extra $10 million can go to somebody else. So it is a really tricky question, but it's one that I think is extremely fascinating.
Yeah, Nick, what are your thoughts on that? Just the how scheme and everything comes together, and I guess what are your thoughts on how it's going to play out with the Vikings now, where we have shifted some of that burden onto Kirk Cousins, where we did have Diggs. Thelen is still around, obviously, but we had Diggs, who obviously, great wide receiver, helping things out. What are your thoughts on how that's really going to manifest now with Kirk having to shoulder more of that burden as we move into this next season?
Yeah, it's so tough to disentangle all those things because they all go together, and then there's some like covariances as well. So you look at like even answering the question, did Kirk Cousins have a good supporting cast last year? Because it's, Stefanski was a great play caller. The pass protection was bad. I think it ranked 27th in team pass blocking grade. The receivers were good. Diggs was great. Thelen was good when he was healthy, but he wasn't healthy very much. And then after those two, like there wasn't an NFL caliber wide receiver on the raw. I mean, BC Johnson's like marginally above replacement rate, and then you had Laquan Treadwell. So is that a good? I don't know, and I don't know what to make of. Did Kirk Cousins outplay his supporting cast? I think you would say yes, unless you were saying that a lot of it was due to Kubiak and Stefanski. And so when we're trying to project next year, like how's Kirk Cousins going to do? You lost Stefon Diggs, so that's going to be a huge hit. I think wide receiver is the most important thing to predicting how good of a supporting cast you've got. Is if I could blank. Well, I don't know. I might put scheme above wide receiver, but scheme's an unknown as well because we lost Stefanski. And, Kubiak is the same system. And, you're going to see that I think the same reliance on boots and play action, and that will hopefully boost Kirk Cousins' efficiency. But at the same time, we've seen Kubiak's been around the block, and we've seen some very good offenses from him a long time ago. And we've also recently seen some pretty bad offenses as well. So are we going to get the same level of efficiency as we got last year out from Stefanski? I don't know. That's kind of there's too many unknowns, I think, to be able to confidently predict that. I think the pass protection you hope will be better. I mean, they've invested in it. Brian O'Neill is young and should get better, and Bradbury, as bad as he was last year, you typically see a bump from offensive linemen in their first and their second or third year, so maybe he gets better. So there's so many things going into it. I don't want to punt on the question and say we don't know, but I will say overall, I think with the loss of Stefanski and loss of Stefon Diggs, you should expect the supporting cast to get worse, and you should expect less efficiency from Kirk Cousins. But, football's so random, like that could be totally off. So who knows, I guess.
Okay. Well, as time is ticking down on us here, we're going to go to the final couple questions here. Nick, start with you on this one. Were you surprised when that tweet came out from PFF Minnesota saying that Kirk was the most valuable Viking of the last decade?
I mean, initially, yes, because Kirk's only been here 2 years, right? So how could a quarterback? But then you think about it and you're like, well, what quarterback has been here longer than 2 years? It's not going to be Christian Ponder as the most valuable player of the decade. It's not going to be Adrian Peterson, as great as Adrian Peterson was in the early years, because as fantastic as he was, you got to look at like the run blocking as well. He had some fantastic run blocking lines that really helped him become that MVP caliber player. So it might be Stefon Diggs, but like quarterbacks just matter so much more. Like 2 years of Kirk Cousins playing well, 1 year really well and 1 year average, are going to be worth more than 5 years of good to great wide receiver play. It's not going to be Adam Thielen. So like Harrison Smith is really good, but he's a defender and he's a safety, and that's just not going to have the impact that like a quarterback will. So once I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Eric, how wide was the gap on this one? How far did Kirk lap?
I think Harrison Smith is 3 of the top 5 most valuable seasons among non-quarterbacks. Thielen's 18 season was the most valuable among non-quarterbacks. So there have been some good performances there for sure. But when you look at it, I mean, the quarterback order went Kirk last year, Kirk 2018, Case Keenum 2017, Sam Bradford 2016. So the Vikings have gotten progressively better at the QB position, actually. 2014 Bridgewater, 2015 Bridgewater was a little weaker than 2014 Bridgewater. Interesting. And all of those are the only players that ever got more than win above replacement for the Vikings. Thielen was like 0.8 as a wide receiver. So Anthony Harris third last season among non-quarterbacks in the past decade. So, the funny thing from what Nick says, the Vikings took until halfway through the decade to be any good this decade, right? So you can almost throw out 2010 to 2014 really, because there was only one playoff team in that group and it was mostly a fluke. 15 to 19, that's where a lot of the good stuff has been. And Kirk, interestingly, has been the lead dog and played a lot of snaps for all those teams.
Makes sense. All right, last thing here, Eric, for you, because I know that you've been on our friend Matthew Coller's podcast talking about one of my favorite Vikings of all time. So we have about 3.5 minutes left here before we got to sign off. Dante Culpepper, Kirk Cousins. If we were comparing them, if we could choose to have one, which one would be the right choice?
Dante. The hard part about Dante is the only thing. So Dante threw for 4,700 yards in 2004. Randy Moss got traded, and he didn't. It took him 5 years to get over 4,700 yards again total. So there's a lot of confounders with Dante. He had Carter Moss early, and he had Moss by himself. Struggled for a couple of years. Then they got in Marcus Robinson, Burleson, Wiggins, good offensive line. Scott Linehan was a great coach. In 2005, when they got rid of Linehan and they got rid of Moss, he was terrible. So, there's always that cloud over him. But I got to say, Dante probably second best quarterback in the history of the franchise. Third best if you count Favre.
Favre? I'm not sure who that is. I don't know.
Brett Favre's 2009 season was unlike anything we're going to see, right? Tarkenton's won, right? Then you go through, Tommy Kramer had a season, Wade Wilson had a season, Rich Gannon wasn't good with the Vikings. Warren Moon, okay, I could go with, although Warren was not the greatest quarterback in the red zone, but he was very productive. And he's a Hall of Famer. So maybe put Warren Moon in the discussion as well. But Dante, God, if he and Moss would have played together for 10 years, I think a lot of different things would be said about Dante. So I'm going to go with him.
All right, Nick, Dante, Kirk, who are you picking?
Yeah, I think it's tough a little bit, and it's hard to think of like two more different quarterbacks. Like Kirk is such like a robot, and Dante was not. But Kirk is like, I'm gonna do this all by the book, and Dante's like, I'm gonna chuck it deep because I've got a huge arm and I'm super athletic, and it's like the opposite of that consistency. And it's kind of like going back to comparing Kirk Cousins to Deshaun Watson. It's the similar type of comparison. Obviously, Dante's a little different type of player than Watson, but different sort of styles there. So I think I would have to go with Dante. Just when you saw his peak in 2004, that was just something that we've seen very few seasons of in Minnesota Vikings history. And really, that's what you're kind of looking for in a quarterback, is somebody who can get you to that peak, because consistency will get you like a 6 seed. An MVP caliber season will get you a shot at the Super Bowl. So, I think I would go for the upside and gamble with Dante.
There it is.
Yeah, I mean, 200. Yeah, I mean, he had a season. I mean, the one thing that I think separates them too, Dante in his first season had 470 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns. Sorry, he had 10 touchdowns on the ground in 2002. Like, he's just always, he gave you that other threat as well. Although in 02, he led the league in interceptions and fumbles. So that's not something necessarily Kirk will do. But there's so much high variance with him. I think I'd go with him.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, there it is. Right in the nick of time, because Lord knows we're not upgrading the Zoom account to Pro. So we got 40 minutes and we just made it in.
Boom.
Boom. As always, gentlemen, thanks for making time. Listeners, thanks for sticking with us. And yeah, we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.